Book 2, Part 2. Jonathan took my hand. "Let's go talk." When I only nodded, he turned and we headed down the hallway. "You are messing with the wrong girl," I heard Track hiss at my sadistic cousin as we left. For some reason, she had decided it was her life goal to torment me. "Is that a threat?" I heard her snap back, this time without the sappiness she saved for crowds. I smiled, but didn't hear Track's answer. I loved my best friend. Jonathan took me into his study. He closed the door and then sat me down on a couch. He sat next to me, put his arm over the back of it, and frowned. "She did that just to hurt you." "I know," I whispered. He ran a hand down the side of my cheek. "I don't want to go. But your father says that we have to finally start following protocol. We're dating now, and with the union in 6 months. My head shot up and he chuckled. "Okay, so we haven't set a date, but that's the earliest." He moved a bit closer to me. "You know, if I were a paranoid man, I would think you might have changed your mind." I rolled my eyes playfully and he lifted my chin. "I know this is all happening fast, Trina, but I have no doubts in my mind. I want to spend the rest of my life with you and only you." Wow, that was deep. I didn't do well with deep. My mind would go blank, and it did. So, instead of giving the perfect reply, I sat there blinking and trying to think of something to say. I really did envy those people that always knew exactly what to say at just the right time. Finally, I just admitted that, and he nodded. "All I need to know is that this is what you want, whether it's in 6 months or longer. I just need to know that you want me, that you want a life with me. With that, I'll wait as long as you need to." What had I done to deserve such a wonderful boyfriend? I had asked myself that dozens of times since he came into my life. What man of any race would go through what he had with me these last 2 months? He was in love with a vampire that had werewolf blood in her veins. That was no easy feat by itself. My dad had done it, but my mother, like most hybrids, never shifted. Jonathan had endured so much already and never once complained. I understood that protocol said we couldn't live under the same roof until we were unioned. He and my dad had stretched that until it almost snapped. He had sacrificed his work and put his life on hold to help me get through this. I smiled at him. "Yes, I do, Jonathan. I love you and I want to spend my life with you." And I meant every word of it. His smile was tinged with relief and he took my face in his hands. "Then you tell me when I'm going too fast. Don't let me push you away with my eagerness. I don't ever want to push you away." I wrapped my arms around him and kissed him. Chapter 2. We sat on the couch and talked for a few hours. He told me that he would talk every night and that he would never be more than a phone call away. His apartment was over an hour drive from here, but he said he wanted to come and tuck me in every night. I had to insist that that was just too far of a drive just for that. "Then we'll talk on the phone before you go to sleep," he stated, and I finally agreed. My heart was aching, but I smiled and laughed. If he could be this strong, so could I. He had done so much already. I'd be brave and help him by not breaking down. I refused to go to sleep when the time came, insisting I would be fine. I wanted to spend every possible minute I could with him. As the time for him to leave got closer, I felt the silent panic rise up in me. I offered to help him pack, but he said that the help was seen to that. I was glad, not sure I could have done that without losing it. He walked me to my room and showed me where the charger for my phone was. He had it plugged in by my nightstand. That way, he smiled, when we're having our long talks, I won't have to worry about your battery going dead in the middle of it. I gave a soft chuckle, and he showed me how to plug it in. Wow, was I really this technologically challenged? I guess so, because I had to make sure I paid attention. As he was showing me, I noticed the little icon was gone, the one that had told me I had a message. There had been one before the party, but I hadn't been able to figure out how to check it. I pushed it out of my mind and leaned over to kiss him. After some amazing kissing, we laid side by side on my bed and talked more. He told me that he would email me more pictures of places that he found, and that would mean I needed to start checking my emails. Okay, so I guess I was a bit challenged when it came to that stuff. He stroked my cheek and smiled. I know this'll be hard, he whispered, but 6 months is not very long for us. I nodded, closing my eyes and leaning into his palm. He kissed my cheek and then pulled me down so my head was on his chest. He wrapped his arms around me and held me. We laid there quietly for a long time until his cell phone blasted the serenity. I growled and he moaned. Ignore it, I whispered, and he nodded, kissing the top of my head. I was planning on it. I smiled and kissed the base of his neck. He moaned softly, and my brows lifted. I kissed the spot again and got the same response. My smile widened, and I kissed a little bit higher, resting one hand on his chest. His hand was stroking the back of my hair now as I kissed up his neck, then kissed his chin, and smiled down at him. You make it very hard for a man to leave, he whispered, his voice a little raspy. I smiled. So what do I need to do to make it impossible? He chuckled and then grabbed me and rolled us over. I was on my back now, and he was laying next to me, leaning over me. Raina Beldren, are you trying to charm me into staying? He and I both knew that a vampire's power of persuasion didn't work on other vampires, but I wasn't going to bring that up. I smiled softly up at him, parting my lips just a little, and opening my eyes a bit wider. He put one finger on the middle of my forehead and then slowly ran it downward, over my nose to my lips. When he stopped there, my chest was rising and falling fast. He leaned closer so that his lips were almost on mine, his gray eyes soft and watching me. You have already charmed me, Raina. I am completely yours, he whispered in a deep, throaty voice. It didn't matter that vampire power behind it didn't work on me. He worked on me. My body felt a wave of heat rush through it, and the rest of the world seemed to fall away. I watched his eyes, and then he kissed me softly, so very, very softly. I love you, he whispered between his kisses. His voice was shaking when he whispered I love you, I whispered between his kisses. His voice was shaking when he whispered it back. When it was finally time for him to leave, I broke my silent promise and a few tears fell. We were standing in the garage next to his car. Only my bodyguards were there with us. The others had said their goodbyes inside. The car with his things had already left. He wiped my cheek with his thumb, but his eyes looked so sad. Do you have your phone? He smiled. I nodded and patted my back pocket. I'll call you the minute I pull out of the gate. I could only nod. My throat was tight and my stomach knotting. And you will call me any time, day or night, no matter if you have a reason or not. Another nod, and he kissed me again. I watched him walk to the driver's side. He stood at it, watching me, and then finally climbed in. More tears ran down my cheek as the engine started. Then he drove away. I felt like dropping to my knees or running after him when he slowly pulled away, but I stood where I was until the humming of the automatic doors stopped. I stared at them, trying to will him to come back, but he didn't. I felt a hand on my shoulder and turned. It was Michael. He looked worried. All I could do was give a small nod, then turned and headed back inside. My phone rang as soon as I got inside, and I lost my balance as I tried to yank it out of my pocket. "Did you miss me?" he said with a chuckle. I laughed, wiping my face, and walked to my room talking. We talked the entire time he drove to his apartment, and for a few hours after that. I laid on my bed, my eyes closed, pretending he was laying there with me instead of an hour away. "You might notice you're missing something," he said at one point. "What is that?" I chuckled. "A pillow." I turned my head, looking at the pile I was laying on. "I stole it so that I could have your scent with me when I'm here." "Really?" I grinned. "Mm-hmm. And if you look under one of yours, you'll find something I left in place of it." I sat up quickly and felt under my heaps of pillows. There was my clock and Wolfie, but then I felt something else. I pulled it out and smiled. It was one of his t-shirts. I brought it to my nose and inhaled it. "Am I forgiven for the theft?" he chuckled. "For now," I grinned, and laid back down, holding the shirt to me. I finally had to plug the phone in when he explained that the beeping I kept hearing meant that the battery was low. Then a yawn snuck in. He didn't say anything about it, or the next one, but after the third he finally mentioned it. Of course I argued that I wasn't tired, even though I was. "How about this? The minute your eyes open, you call me." I bit my lower lip and nodded, then replied, "Okay," since he really wasn't lying here next to me. It took us 10 more minutes to finally say goodbye. When I sat the phone on my nightstand, I realized how warm it had gotten. I made sure the charger was plugged in, and then laid back on my pillow. I didn't cry this time. I was smiling and happy. This would be hard, but we would do it. Everyone else had to go through this. I rolled over and pulled Wolfie out just as my eyes closed. Several hours later, I woke with a start, gasping for air. I looked around the room, trying to find the reason for my panic. Then I felt it, that tingle that always started in my legs. "No, not now," I hissed at them. If I shifted, I wouldn't be able to call Jonathan. I closed my eyes and concentrated, finding that place that held the spark. I pushed it back, feeling a few beads of sweat trickle down my face. Finally, the sensation ebbed, and after one last push, it faded away. The clock said it was only 2 p.m., too early to be up if I was going to try to get back on schedule. I wanted to get back on it. That way I could plan my nights better. I may be part vampire and part wolf, and I may be shifting between the two forms, but I was going to try to find some normalcy. I wanted Jonathan to have a happy life with me, and I was determined to start by getting better control over things, like when I shifted, and my sleeping habits. The less he had to worry about me, the better. He was a very busy man, and I was going to make sure he didn't have to drop everything to help me all the time. I would beat this thing and find a balance. I was going to be the best girlfriend he could imagine. I laid back down and forced myself to stay there until 5 p.m. When I finally got up, I reached for the phone, then stopped myself. Instead, I went and took a quick shower and even dried my hair most of the way. I wouldn't be needy either. Another thing I had told myself before and had slipped up on it. When I went back into my room, I made myself walk calmly. I unplugged the charger and went to hit the button, but stopped. There was a message light blinking. I had a voicemail. I grinned and hit that button instead. I heard a few clicks and then silence. I frowned and listened harder. "Hello?" I said, and then rolled my eyes. Why was I trying to talk to a message? But there was nothing there. A few seconds later, there was another beep, and it was done. Frowning, I looked at the phone and then pushed the number 3 button, holding it down until the screen showed Jonathan. I grinned as a picture of he and I came up on the screen along with his name. It's the one we had taken in the car on our first date. That seemed like such a long time ago. "Good evening, my love," came his voice, and I smiled. It was sappy, but I liked it. "Why didn't you leave a message?" I chuckled as I left my room and walked down the hallway. "Why would I do that?" "Well, you just left a blank one. Why didn't you say anything?" There was a slight pause. "I didn't leave a message, Rena." "I know you didn't. That's what I just said," I chuckled, bouncing down the stairs. "I mean, I didn't call you." "You didn't?" "No. What number came up when you hit the message button?" I shrugged. "I don't know. I just assumed it was you, so I didn't pay any attention." "Okay, I want you to look at the phone now. Hit the menu button, then scroll to call history." I nodded, pulled the phone away, and pushed the button. A list of options came up, and I chewed my lip as I moved through them. One of them said call history, and I smiled, then accidentally hung up on Jonathan. "Crap," I barked, and then dropped the phone trying to hit the right button. It rang before I could reach for it. "Sorry about that," I sighed. He laughed. "It's okay, don't worry about it. How did you sleep?" "Horrible," I stated, which was true. Would I be a monster if I said I was kind of glad? I giggled as I walked down the stairs, and he continued, "I must be, because I kind of like that you had a hard time without me there." "It was positively torturous," I smiled, waving one hand theatrically. He filled me in on what he had been doing, mostly catching up on work. That was my fault. But he never gave the slightest hint that it bothered him. "Beamer's is up for inspection in a week," he stated, "so I have the crew out there now. Have to go over the place top to bottom if I want to pass." "What would happen if you didn't?" I asked. He gave a theatrical gasp. "Don't say that, love." I was smiling so wide I was surprised my face didn't hurt. I liked this sudden nickname. It was definitely better than Hun or Babe. "If we don't pass, I don't get the license renewed until we can." "Oh, well then, I'm sure you'll pass the first time." "And what are you doing tonight?" I looked around the hallway and shrugged. Wandering aimlessly, then I thought I might go for a swim before wandering some more. This time he didn't laugh. "I hate that you have to stay in there." I fiddled with a sculpture on a pedestal and shrugged. "Don't. I'm used to it." "Well, don't get too used to it. When we're living together, we'll be very busy." "Doing what?" I grinned, reaching up and straightening a picture of an ocean scene. "Traveling, exploring, anything we want." "What about your work?" "The company is sound, and I have made sure it can run itself for short periods. Plus, there's always an internet or cell phone connection somewhere." We both laughed then. My dad stepped out of one of his offices, turned, and smiled at me. I waved, and he raised his brows. "It's Jonathan," I whispered. "Would it be anyone else?" he chuckled. Jonathan laughed from the other end, and I wandered around the manor talking to him. I was on my 3rd or 4th turn when my phone beeped. "Is that my battery already?" I asked, looking towards the stairs that led to my room. "Did you keep it on the charger all night?" Yes? Then it shouldn't be. Look at the screen. I held it away from my ear. It says incoming call and has a number. What's the number? I read it to him and he shrugged. Do you recognize it? I laughed. Me? I don't ever use a cell phone. We really need to have to get you into the 21st century, love. I heard a clicking noise and asked what he was doing. I'm looking up that phone number on the internet. You can do that? Another laugh. You can do just about anything online these days. Okay, that was pretty impressive. Unlisted, he mumbled. Just says it's from one of 2 zip codes. That was no help. Aw, did the internet let you down? I teased, and he chuckled. I love a challenge. I'm on a mission now, he declared playfully. I giggled and headed down another hall, not paying any attention to where I was going. Raina? Yeah? Do me a favor, he said in a serious voice. Okay. Don't ever answer if you don't recognize the number, okay? Okay, I replied, my brows knit together. I programmed all the numbers of the people you know in your phone. If it rings and no name comes up, just let it ring. Got it, I stated, nodded my head, and saluted with my free hand. We talked for another hour, and then my battery did start to beep. I knew he had to get back to work, so I told him I was going to go for a swim. Paige hasn't been thrilled with me slacking on my PT, I chuckled. Okay, and even though I said to keep your phone on you at all times, I didn't mean literally. It's not waterproof. We both laughed again. I love you, Raina, he whispered softly, and I felt a nice shiver run through me. I love you too, Jonathan. I was nearly skipping when I walked into the pool room. Paige was actually in the water swimming laps. She stopped and waved at me. I waved back and headed to my changing room. When I came out, Track was there, wearing a suit as well. I smiled at him, and he tossed a bright plastic stick in the water. It sunk, and he smiled at me, tossing a blue one next. It was a challenge, and I nodded. When he threw the last one in, I was on one side of the pool, he was on the other. Paige was sitting on the edge now. Michael knelt next to her. I looked at Paige, and she announced, "Ready, set, go." Track and I both dove in and quickly scrambled to get the colored sinkers. At one point, we had to wrestle for a yellow one that we both reached at the same time. He got it away from me, and I turned and grabbed a green one. When we finally surfaced, I had 4, but he had 5. I shook my head, and we pulled ourselves out of the water. This time Michael threw them in, with our backs to the pool so we couldn't take note where they landed. We dove from the same side this time, and I won, 5-4. We were declaring a rematch when we heard footsteps. Martin was standing by the door, and Alyssa waltzed in. "Great," I mumbled, and Track chuckled, pulling himself out and sitting on the edge. I stayed in, resting my chest and arms on the side next to him. "Having fun?" she grinned, giving us a look I didn't understand, but didn't like. Track's growl was not as quiet as mine had been. She walked closer. "Taryn did call my dad," she announced, and we both had to remember who she was talking about. "Oh, that's great," I put in when she looked at me hard. She nodded. "Yes, it is. I talked to Uncle Thomas, and he said I could invite him over here for a few hours." I thought my dad loved me. I did pull myself up then and sat next to Track. "Great. When's he coming?" "He'll be here shortly," she giggled, and then her eyes widened. "Oh, I do hope that you like him." I wondered if she really did practice in front of a mirror. "Why would you care if we liked him?" Track asked bluntly, and I had to bite back a smile. She flinched. "What do you mean? Raina's my dear cousin. And you, well, Track, I thought we were friends." She turned her shoulder in and poked out her lower lip. She actually looked hurt, and I sighed. "Well, from what you said, he seems great, so I'm sure you will like him." I was such a sucker for the guilt card. Alyssa beamed and then turned. "I'll bring him by as soon as he arrives," she called over her shoulder, and she bounced off towards the door. "And we'll have Ray's doctor give him a CAT scan," Track whispered, and I fell into his arm laughing. Chapter 3. Track and I were still fighting for title champion when Alyssa came back with Taryn. He was nice looking, naturally. Alyssa wouldn't have it any other way. His brown hair had a slight wave to it, and it hung to his shoulders. At first glance, he was only about 2 inches taller than her, until I realized she was wearing those crazy heels again, which made him about 6 inches taller. Track and I got out of the pool as one of the maids came over and handed us each a large towel. Track ran his over his hair and then draped it around his neck. I opted to wrap mine around me, tucking the end under my arm. Alyssa was almost glowing as she looked at her new boyfriend. "Taryn Wendell, this is my dearest and closest cousin, Raina Beldren, and her very best friend, Track." She paused and then frowned. "I'm so sorry, Track. I don't believe I know your last name." "Don't worry, I do have one," he chuckled, not looking at her, and held out his hand. "Hey, Taryn, nice to meet you." Taryn smiled and shook his hand. "It's nice to meet you, too," then turned to me. I dried my hand off first, shooting Track a hard look, then took a step closer. "Hello, Taryn. Alyssa has told me enough about you that I feel like we're friends already." Okay, so spending time watching my dad deal with people did come in handy now and then. I inhaled slowly and my eyes widened. He was mostly vampire, but like me, he was part werewolf. It was distant, but it was there. Alyssa's smile grew 10 times, and Taryn laughed a little nervously. "I'm flattered. Thank you, Miss Beldren." Track barked a laugh then, and coughed to cover it. Alyssa hugged Taryn's other arm. "Oh, I'm sure she doesn't expect you to call her that. Do you, Raina?" I blinked hard. "What? Of course not. Please, just Raina." Taryn nodded again. I could smell that he was a bit nervous, and I looked down at myself, then back to the odd couple. "Would you guys like to join us?" Alyssa chuckled in one of her, "Oh, what a ridiculous, silly little girl you are," tones. "Maybe another time, Raina. I thought I'd give Taryn a tour of the manor." "Oh, okay," I smiled, shrugging. Taryn looked at the pile of sinkers on the side of the pool. "Who's winning?" "I am," Track and I both said at the same time. I turned and put a hand on my hip. "I won the last time, and that broke the tie." Alyssa laughed. "You can see how close they are, just like brother and sister." Track went to say something, and I turned and shoved him into the water. Ignoring the splash and threats from behind me, I smiled at Taryn. "If you change your mind about the pool." Taryn looked like he wanted to, but Alyssa was already pulling him away. "Thanks, Raina. We'll let you know." Again, "It was very nice to meet you, Raina," he called back, and I waved. Poor guy. He seemed nice enough, and now he was leashed to my evil cousin. Something grabbed me around the waist, and I screamed as Track laughed and flung himself backwards, throwing us both into the pool. We finally finished our competition. I won 12-11, although Track swore one of the times I cheated. I picked up a towel and wrapped it around me, then looked towards the door. Did you smell him? Smell who? Track asked, this time wrapping the towel around his waist too. Taryn, I whispered, even though Paige had left and my bodyguards were clear over by the door. No, why? He isn't full vampire. He's part wolf. Track gave a low whistle, shaking his head. It must be deep. I didn't catch the scent. I nodded. I wonder if Alyssa knows. I wonder if he knows. That was true. Lots of vampires firmly believed they were pure blood and had no idea of a little love tryst buried deep in their family tree. Just then Michael walked over to me. He had a stern look on his face, and I wrinkled my brows, trying to figure out what I could have done wrong. Jonathan called, he stated, and I looked towards my changing room where I'd left my phone. He says it went straight to voicemail, so your battery is probably dead. Oh, I mumbled, and Track gave me an odd look, then rolled his eyes. What? Nothing. Go get dressed. You look like a half-drowned pup, he said with a grin. I glanced over his shoulder at the pool, and he quickly moved further from the edge. We both chuckled, and he headed towards another changing room. I gave Michael a quick smile and then trotted off to my own. As soon as I stepped inside, I grabbed the phone off the bench and looked at it. It had a voicemail. Smiling, I hit the button, but then the phone only beeped and "battery low" flashed on the screen. I growled at it and then hurried into the shower, then yanked on my clothes and ran to my bedroom. Track walked in as I was plugging the phone into the charger. He shook his still damp hair and then plopped on my bed next to me. I pressed the voicemail button and put the phone to my ear. The first was Jonathan. I smiled as he chuckled and told me to call him when I finally realized my battery was dead and plugged it in. I hit the button to save that one, just because it was his voice. Then I went to put the phone down, but noticed it still showed there was another message. Another prank call, I huffed after listening to the silence and then the beep. Prank call? I nodded and told Track about the first one, explaining how Jonathan had tried to look the number up online. He frowned and took my phone. I leaned over his arm while he went straight to my call history. Show off, I huffed, and he chuckled, but kept his eyes on the screen. There was one phone number there that didn't have any name by it. It was there 4 times. He frowned and then took out his own phone. While looking at mine, he dialed the number on his own and put it to his ear. I hadn't thought about that. I wondered if Jonathan had. He listened for a second, then growled and hung up. Just a generic message, computer generated. I nodded and went to say something, but he put a finger up, grinned, and hit redial. I leaned closer, and when I heard the beep on the other end, Track gave a very deep growl into it. Raina is Pac, and Pac takes care of his own. Don't call her again. Then he hung up. My jaw dropped. He chuckled and flopped back on the bed. You better call your boyfriend back before he has Michael come find out what's taking you so long. My brows rose and I stuck out my bare foot and kicked his leg. Just then I felt the tingles start. I winced and tightened my lips. Not now, I growled softly, and Track rolled onto his side watching me. After a few minutes I opened them and drew in a long, slow breath. Track shook his head. Are you doing that to get better control, or because it's hard to dial his number without thumbs? He yelped when my foot landed in his stomach this time. He was fast, though, and grabbed my ankle. Wrong move, he growled playfully, and was up and pouncing before I could shake loose. I rolled off the bed and landed with a hard thud. He had me by the arm, and I twisted, bringing him down with me. He landed partially in my lap, and we both growled and then laughed. Michael poked his head in, saw us in a heap on the floor, shook his head, and went back out. I shoved Track off me and jumped up, still laughing. My hair was in a wild mane around and over my face now. There was a knock on the door, and then Alyssa walked in, followed by Taryn. I quickly straightened my shirt and hair and smiled. "Hello." Alyssa stared at me with a look of confusion and mild disgust. Track reached over and flipped my hair out of my face, a sheepish grin still wide on his own. "We aren't disturbing you, are we?" Alyssa asked in a quiet voice, shooting her new beau a look. Track shrugged. "Nope, just kicking Raina's butt. I can do that any time." I felt Taryn stare and smiled at him. "Sorry, it's a wolf thing. We tend to play a little rough together." "Okay, why did that sound better in my head?" Taryn smiled, his brown eyes bright and sincere. Such an odd contrast to Alyssa, who looked like she was ticked at me for something. "I understand," he smiled, and I decided I did like him, which made me feel even more sorry for him. I went to ask about his scent, but Track stepped up next to me. "So, how'd you like your tour?" Alyssa grinned. "Oh, he loves it. We looked at the artwork and antiques, and we also talked about the layout and how some things really flow well, while others, well, could perhaps use a bit of improvement." She winked at me and I tilted my head. "Really? What was wrong with the manor?" Track laughed. "Well, that must have been about as exciting as dirt." He looked at Taryn. "Did she show you the game room?" "We did pass by it," Taryn stated slowly. His eyes shifted to me and I smiled. "What about my dad's car collection?" His eyes widened then and I nodded. "I don't get excited about cars, but Track and the guys go in there just to drool sometimes." "So, Track, where's that beautiful mate of yours these days?" Alyssa put in quickly, then turned and leaned closer to Taryn. "That's what werewolves call their significant others." She patted his arm and smiled. I tilted my head the other way, dumbfounded by what I was seeing. Then I glanced at Track to see how he would reply. "Come to think of it, I don't think you ever told me her name," she chirped. And again she turned to her guest. "You see, I have met her twice now, his mate that is, but each time she was in her wolf form, so we were never properly introduced." My lip twitched then, and Track chuckled. She's right. She's right where she should be, and yeah, she has a name." Alyssa waited and then frowned. "Well, what is it?" "Ariel." I stiffened, but Alyssa smiled. "That's a beautiful name." My lips tightened and Track stepped up next to me, his arm just barely touching me. Ariel was the name I had always used when we played make-believe as children. I blinked a few times and Alyssa smiled. "I'm surprised that Ariel is willing to let you spend so much time here. I've heard wolves are very protective with their mates." Track nodded, fiercely. "But she and Raina are very, very close." "Oh," Alyssa replied slowly. Well, it must be one of those pack things." She turned to Taryn. "I'll tell you what I know sometime. It's absolutely fascinating." I went to say something and Track bumped my arm. "So, Taryn, you like cars?" "Very much so," he stated, showing his excitement. "Well then, Alyssa, you don't mind if I show Taryn here the parts of the manor you seem to find too boring?" Her smile dipped. Of course not. I like cars. Track laughed. I meant just me and him. Oh. She looked at Taryn, and I think she expected him to turn down Track's offer. He didn't. The two of them left, with Track promising not to keep him too long. Alyssa sighed. Well, that's not what I expected to happen. It's a guy thing, I chuckled. They need to have guy time every now and then, or they get a little weird. My phone rang again, and I rushed over to it. I glanced down at the screen, smiled, and answered it. Hello, love, came his sweet voice, and I felt my stomach tighten. Hello, you. You? Was that all I could think of? I had to come up with a nickname for him, too. And that's where I'm going to stop.